Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1989 period piece comedy Harlem Nights. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out yet again to Shine for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you'd like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your requests as soon as I possibly can. Now, Harlem Nights is one of those films that is kind of infamous nowadays because of how much of a box office and critical disappointment it was upon its release. It marked the first time that Eddie truly hit a genuine stumbling block when he was in the middle of his meteoric rise as an actor in Hollywood. And it's always been a film that I've been fascinated about seeing because of its reputation. And I gotta be honest here, I think the film was a bit disappointing when it comes to how it had such a remarkable and talented cast and it didn't get the most out of them. But at the same time, I kind of liked the film. Like, I didn't hate this movie at all. I thought it was actually kind of a time waster or a decent movie. I definitely don't think it's anywhere near as bad as some of the critics make it out to be. I think they were really railing on it and just going for the jugular and just ripping it to shreds for other reasons than what was actually on the screen. If you look at some of the reviews for this film back in 1989, I think a lot of the reviews were so scathing because they saw blood in the water when it comes to Eddie. And there's numerous instances of critics around this time when a high profile, popular, big name star makes a film that isn't on the same level of quality as their previous films. And that turns out to be something that becomes a hit piece where they are specifically targeting that star and just grilling them and just destroying them verbally with these reviews because they see a sign of weakness and they want to take advantage of it. It was a weird thing, and I don't quite get it. It happened to a ton of different actors and performers around this time. It wasn't just Eddie Murphy. I think the fact that he also wrote and directed it, it also gave them more ammo and made them go even harder at Eddie for of the movie and its inconsistencies and the issues that it has. And I think in a lot of ways their targeting was unfair in retrospect. I really do. Because if you see this film, no, it's not a classic. I don't think it's on the same level as Beverly Hills Cop or 48 Hours or Trading Places or some of these other films that Eddie did around the time, including something like The Golden Child, which I really enjoy. The critics also weren't that big on, but some of them were. Like, I believe Roger Ebert did enjoy The Golden Child. Didn't enjoy Harlem Nights, though. Both him and Gene Siskel gave it two thumbs down. But I think despite it not being on the same level as those other films, it still got some genuine merits, and one of them is Eddie's direction. I think Eddie did a really good job. I think the crap that he got from critics saying that he's an amateur, he doesn't know what he's doing, he needs to stick to acting. Uh, I don't get it. I didn't see a lot of scenes in this film that were particularly bad in terms of the framing. I didn't see scenes in the movie that were particularly terrible when it comes to the usage of camera techniques. Saw some nice traveling shots, some good variety of zooms or pans or different sort of perspectives and different techniques. It didn't look like the effort from a director who was completely clueless. So I was honestly more surprised by how decent the film looked visually and how kind of solid the direction was. Was there a few moments where the direction could have had a little bit more energy, could have took a little bit more risks visually? Sure. But I appreciate that Eddie was like, "Hey, this isn't my bag. I'm not an experienced director. This is the first time I'm doing this. I'm going to try to take it easy with some scenes and I'm not going to try to overexert myself just to try to impress somebody." And as a result, it's a steady, solid job, well done, in my opinion, from a directorial standpoint. So I think the criticisms that were thrown at him for his direction, I think that was really off the mark because I don't think he did a bad job directing it at all. I've seen worse efforts from actors turned directors than what Eddie did here. I don't think Eddie's direction was so egregious and so bad that he should have stayed away from the director's chair. I think that his work here was actually solid and efficient enough that there was something to work with here. Maybe if he continued to hone his craft, he could have become an even better director. But because of the critics who were just absolutely savage when it comes to his direction, he just saw that as a sign that he's not a director and it's not meant to be. And I think that's too bad because what you see here is actually pretty good. It's not bad at all. So I think there was a potential building block, so to speak, for Eddie to do more. And it's a shame that he was essentially bullied by the press to stop, to never direct again, because they completely turned him into a laughing stock. And I don't think it was that bad of an effort. It wasn't something that was justified in terms of that level of vitriol. The script was also written by Eddie Murphy, and I think it's not it's not grand, it's not amazing. It's definitely got some moments where it's a bit off in terms of the tone in particular. It starts off really strong with some really unexpected uh uh grit and violence and just some really good wit in terms of dialogue. And I would say for like the first 40 minutes of the movie, it's actually really good when it comes to the script and the story. Does a good job building the characters, does a good job having a lot of moments of just genuine laugh out loud hilarity. The scene with Della Reese and Eddie Murphy fighting each other, that is comedy gold. There's other moments with Richard Pryor's character Sugar and Eddie's character Quick in terms of dialogue and back and forth that's really funny. Uh, so are scenes with Benny and Vera and their whole antagonistic relationship. And when it establishes the conflict, which is this rival owner of this other uh, gambling establishment in the town, Bugsy Calhoun, the crime boss who owns most of the after hours clubs in Harlem, and wants Sugar wants Sugar Ray's candy store, his own illegal after hours nightclub, shut down because it's making all this money and taking away from his bottom line. When it establishes that conflict, it's a pretty strong conflict because you got this guy who's got a lot of power and influence in this town. He's a gangster, so he's a different kind of uh I wouldn't say hustler, but he is a different kind of candy store after hours club owner than Sugar. Sugar's not really ruthless. He's not that kind of character. That's not his personality. That's not who he is. And so the differing approaches that they have to their after hours clubs and their um, illegal or illicit activities creates a nice contrast. And when Calhoun brings in his cop ally, Sergeant Phil Cantone, who's crooked and is bought out by Bugsy, then you get an extra layer of conflict. So I think that was actually something that was written rather well by Eddie, in terms of, oh, we have this rival um, crime boss who doesn't like what Sugar and his crew are doing in Harlem, wants them to leave. He's trying to muscle them out. They then come up with this plan to pull one over on him, make this bet on this boxing match, and walk away with $50,000 apiece for everyone in their crew, and then move out and move away from Harlem because things are getting too hot. And you get some stuff involving a bit of revenge as well because of what happens to some of the I wouldn't say members of the crew, but what happens to the club itself. uh Bugsy eventually retaliates by burning down the candy store, and so Sugar and his crew turn the tables on Bugsy and burn his club and burn him by the end of the movie, which is really satisfying. So there's a lot of elements when it comes to the script that actually work. So that's why I don't think the script is Razzie worthy. I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be, but it is a screenplay that could have used a little bit more polish, could have used uh, another draft or another writer maybe, because Eddie, he wasn't really that well versed or someone who had a ton of experience writing scripts. So maybe if you had somebody else involved, could punch up some of the dialogue a little bit more and fix some of the other more glaring flaws about the script. Because to me, the script, one of the biggest issues that it has is that there are scenes where it's not taking itself seriously at all, and it's just an over the top romp or parody of these kind of period pieces. But then it's trying to be serious, and it's trying to have certain kinds of emotions, or it's trying to be intense, and you can't be both. And when you have scenes like the scene with Arsenio Hall's character where he's just hooting and hollering and just being over the top like he's a cartoon character, and you couple that with other scenes with a femme fatale and some of this other uh uh plot that's going on throughout the script, some of these other plot elements that are less over the top and less silly, it just creates a film that's very fractured when it comes to the story and the script, and it becomes very jarring. And I think that it was just not the best approach to take. Like Eddie even said something along the lines that he kind of looks back at this and he wishes that he did have a little bit more time with the script, because he feels like he just kind of made some stuff up on the fly and just kind of, he didn't say he half-assed it, but he kind of insinuated something along those lines. And I think that that definitely does come across here. Like there are moments of really solid writing, but then there's other moments where it's just off, and some of the subplots just don't work. Certain characters are out of the film for a pretty good chunk of it. Like Sugar, he's in it for like the first half consistently, And then there's a certain point, like after the midpoint of the film, where Sugar's just gone, and now we're just focusing on Quick and some of the other stuff involving Calhoun and his gang, and it's just not as effective without Sugar's character and his involvement. And yeah, the tone is just off. Like there's some jokes that really work, like the stuff with Della Reese's character and her back and forth with Benny. It was refreshing to see a character in Vera that could hold her own in more ways than one. Like she whipped Quick's ass. And so it was fun to see that kind of character. And I think the script did a really good job establishing the connection between all of these main members of the crew. You really did buy that Vera, despite how she approaches Quick, she does care for him because in a lot of ways, you know, she probably helped raise him, which is why she says things like, you know, that's my boy, I love him. And you get that vibe too, that fatherly vibe from Sugar when it comes to the scenes with him and Quick, where he's trying to tell him to, you know, cool it. You don't need to be so impulsive. You don't need to be a gangster. You can you can go a different path. I really like the scene where Sugar talks to Quick and he's talking to him about forgive me there. Apparently, I all of a sudden was like Stan Shaw in this movie. Uh, but I really like the scene where Sugar and Quick have this heart to heart where Sugar's telling Quick, "Hey, take it easy, man, or you're gonna die. You're gonna be dead at 27. Like, what do you want in your tombstone? Say, uh, he died, 27, but he wasn't no punk. You know that was a really good, poignant, and well written scene. And I think Eddie deserves more credit for moments like that in this film. Speaking of Stan Shaw's character, Jack Jenkins, that's another instance of the tone just being off. It just the whole thing with his character is that he stutters and he can't finish words quickly because he's been hit in the head too many times. It felt very exploitative and just a very lazy joke. And so there are moments like that kind of throughout the film where you just have these kind of lazy gags that don't really add a whole lot to the film and are just not funny. And then you have stuff that features the crew and them trying to pull off the heist or pull off whatever scheme they're doing. And by the end of the film, at a certain point, it just starts to peter out completely and it just sputters to a halt. Like it's a Model T that just ran out of ran out of gas or had like a key piece that was a little loose when it comes to the engine, and then like halfway through the journey like the piece fell and then it just stalled and it got stuck in the middle of the road. And that's kind of how I felt about the script here. Like there are strong things about it, there are effective elements of the screenplay, but when it comes to the plot itself, yeah, after like the first 40 minutes, after a really strong beginning, starts to sag in the middle. The tone just seems to be all over the place, gives you kind of a sense of whiplash. And then by the time you get to the end, even though there's explosions and there's all this stuff that happens in terms of the money being exchanged and there's a boxing match, it just doesn't really have what I would consider to be a very satisfying, very strong conclusion. Like, it's satisfying in one way in terms of what happens to Calhoun. Like, that's very satisfying. But when it comes to the other stuff and how things kind of wrap up with the characters, kind of not so much. It's honestly more sad than anything. Oh, they got revenge, but now they got to move out of Harlem and they can never come back to Harlem again. And I think that might be the point, but even when it comes to that kind of emotion, like, that's just an emotion that's very dissonant from the tone of the majority of the script. So yeah, it's just one of those films where yeah, the script could have been better, but at the end of the day, it's still decent. It's still a decent script. There's enough there in terms of characterization for the characters. There's enough of an arc for some of them. There's some good, genuinely witty lines of dialogue. There's some funny, absolutely uproarious moments of comedy. And there are also moments where it stumbles and it falters, and Eddie's inexperience as a screenwriter really comes to a head. That's why the film kind of sags at certain points. That's why the tone is off. That's why some jokes work and others don't. That's why there are some subplots that just feel like they're kind of going nowhere. Like they're supposed to be there in the plot in order for things to move along a certain way, but the way that they're executed is kind of clunky. And by the time the movie's over, you're just kind of like, okay, that was kind of interesting, but it wasn't what I would consider to be a really incredible or iconic story. And I also feel that the period piece angle didn't really add a whole lot to the story to me, other than just aesthetics. And the reason why this was a period piece is because Eddie wanted it. He wanted it to be. He wanted the film to be a period piece because he had always wanted to do a period piece. I don't know why, but he always wanted to do one. And so, because Eddie was in a lot of ways the king of the world at this time, or the king of Hollywood at the very least, he could do whatever he wanted. And so this was his opportunity to make this dream project, and you can see that passion. You could definitely see that in this film. And another passion of his was to work with Richard Pryor, who was an idol of his. But honestly, I feel this this story or this pairing or this group of talented performers would have been better off in a different kind of movie than Harlem Nights. Something that's not a period piece. Because like I said, the period piece doesn't really add a lot to the characterization. It doesn't add a lot to the plot. It's just window dressing. And other critics have pointed that out, that there's certain lines of dialogue and there's certain things that happen that feel out of place because of the fact that it's a period piece. And I agree with them. There are certain moments where it doesn't even feel like it's an actual period piece. It just feels like it's another Eddie Murphy film that could take place in 1988 when they shot the film with just a few changes of wardrobe and changing the setting up, changing some of the dialogue. So I feel that if that's the only thing that makes it a period piece is the aesthetics, then it doesn't need to be a period piece. And I think just something a little simpler probably would have been a little bit better too. Would have been more successful with audiences as well. Just a fun movie in the vein of the type of project that Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor did together. But this time around, it's Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor. I think that would have been better. The two of them are an unlikely duo. One of them's a con, maybe one of them's a cop or something. You could do something along those lines. I think that would have been a lot better than what we ultimately did get with this script. That being said, the script also isn't an entire, complete and total shit fest either. So it's just one of those things where it is kind of befuddling that this is the direction that Eddie went with his project, and this is how things wound up when it comes to the Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor movie. Um, and speaking of Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor, the cast in this is phenomenal. Like this is a unbelievable cast. I mean, Eddie Murphy in his prime as Quick, Richard Pryor as Sugar, Red Fox in his last film role as Benny, Danny Aiello as the crooked cop, Phil Cantone, Michael Lerner as the villainous crime boss, Bugsy Calhoun, Della Reese as Vera Walker, who's the madam at Ray's Club. Della stole every damn scene that she was in this movie. Like, she was a riot. Like, I was cracking up just so hard. I mean, my sides were hurting. I was laughing so hard when it comes to the scenes with her, or the scenes when her and Red Fox were just taking shots at one another. And Eddie and Richard Pryor, like, I felt the two were a good pair. I felt they clicked, despite the fact that both of them kind of feel otherwise. Like, Eddie feels that he didn't really get the collaboration with Richard that he wanted, because he wanted it to be more than just a work kind of relationship. Like, he wanted to, I think, get to know Richard a little bit more and get a deeper sense of the character that he's playing and his connection with Quick, the character that Eddie was playing, and be something that was more than just a day job. And that's what Richard brought to the film. It was just another job to him. He did the dialogue, he did the scenes for the day, then he went home. And Eddie wanted more than that. And so he felt like the collaboration between the two wasn't really exactly what he wanted. And on the flip side, Richard, he felt like Eddie wasn't happy with him. Like, Eddie didn't like working with him, or he didn't make Eddie happy, and he felt bad about that. And then that's something that I think is kind of sad, is that the two of them were kind of on, they were, I wouldn't say polar opposites, but they weren't able to click. Like, they weren't able to figure out why they were just showing up on set for the day, getting the scene done, and then just going their separate ways. Like, they weren't able to figure out how to do more than that. And it does seem like, from what I've read, that Richard feels bad. And I think Eddie, because of just, let's be honest here, and Eddie's even admitted this, he had such a massive ego at this time. And so, because of that, I'm pretty sure there were a lot of arguments. There were probably a lot of things that happened on set that made Richard feel the way that he ultimately did about working with Eddie, and Eddie not being happy. And because I don't think Richard would bullshit, I don't think he would just make that up. He was not that kind of guy. But you don't see that on camera, though. Like, it just seems like these are two actors who are just working well with one another, to the point where I wish that there wasn't so many scenes where it's just Eddie and there's no Richard, because the two of them actually, I felt, worked very well on screen. And I think Michael Lerner deserves some kudos. He played a very good villain. He was actually intimidating, which I didn't necessarily consider Lerner really being capable of, but he nailed that. Apparently, the studio wanted Robert Duvall, but Eddie campaigned for Michael Lerner, and I think he was right on. I think he made the right choice there. Uh, Stan Shaw, he just has this stutter, and that's the whole thing with the character. It it just wasn't a great performance. And I like Stan Shaw, but this was not good. This is honestly, I would say, one of his weaker performances as an actor. Jasmine Guy is the mistress of Bugsy Calhoun, who's trying to manipulate and essentially uh, take out quick at a certain point later on in the film Dominique LaRue. She was fine for what she was asked to do. Apparently, there was a different actress who was supposed to play this character named Michael Michelle. Michelle was fired during production because, according to Murphy, she wasn't working out. She apparently sued Murphy, though, because Murphy wanted to be romantically involved with her and she didn't want that. And she insinuated that that was why she got fired. And I don't know the full details of what happened, but if it is one of those cases where Eddie was pushing things too far, shame on him. I don't know the full details. I know that it was settled out of court, but I think the replacement actress that they got still did a good job. Arsenio Hall as Reggie, though. I know people love this scene with Arsenio, Miguel Nunez Jr., and some. I believe I think there was this other guy. Forgot who it was, but I know a lot of people love this scene. I'm not one of them. I thought this scene was awful. The scene with Arsenio Hall just being over the top, like he's a cartoon on crack. Just it was cringe of the highest order for me. Like I didn't find it funny at all. I just found it annoying when he was doing the whole Tommy like it was just so bad. I don't understand it. Quick! Like the funniest part of that scene was the guy who was a part of his gang who was just firing this small gun. He didn't even say a single line of dialogue, and he's not even a comedian. And like that was the funniest part of that scene. It wasn't Arsenio Hall just being a total just goober, just an absolute goofball of the highest order, just being just an embarrassing level of just cartoonish. It was just hard to watch. But apparently it's a fan favorite. Like a lot of people love that scene. They think it's hilarious. To each their own. Like I thought it was some of Arsenio's worst acting and one of his lowest points that I've seen from him in his career. The rest of the cast is fine. I mean, Layla Rashawn is Sunshine. Uh, David Marciano is Tony, one of the goons. Vic Polizos is Richie, the bag man. Miguel Nunez Jr. in his little role. Thomas Michael Ford is Tommy Smalls, who was Tommy and Martin. Although I got to be honest, his performance is pretty bad too. Like he was a lot better in Martin. Like it was almost like he was taking acting lessons from Arsenio Hall and was just over the top and obnoxious, and it was just not an authentic performance. Charlie Murphy was surprisingly understated as this character named Jimmy was a member of a Sugar Ray's crew. Robin Harris is also in a bit role as Romeo. But yeah, it's still a really good cast, terrific cast. Despite like a couple performers hamming it up a little bit too much, but thankfully they're not in the film a lot. And for the most part, you have these performers who are just being natural and just clicking with one another, delivering just jab after jab, whether it's verbal or physical. And the strength of the cast is definitely in the main players: Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor, Red Fox, Della Reese, Michael Lerner, Danny Aiello. The cinematography by Woody Omens, it's fine. I didn't think it was really a standout job. I think there were some moments where you could really tell they were shooting on a set, and it kind of took me out of the film at times. Um, I don't know if that was really Eddie's direction or the cinematographer or a bit of both. But the cinematography for the kind of film that it is, not bad. But I wouldn't consider it to be great. Uh, the editing of Alan Balsam and George Bowers, I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was pretty well edited film, especially when it comes to some of the scenes that were a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more zany and over the top. And even some of the scenes that were supposed to be full of some genuine tension and suspense and elements like that, I think they were well edited too. Now, the score by Herbie Hancock, I didn't mind some of the pieces early on, but after a certain point, the score just became a little bit too experimental for my tastes and just felt out of place. So, and I didn't find it to be that memorable. So there were a couple moments early on where it was fine, added a bit to the aesthetic of the film, the period piece stuff. But then there's other stuff later on where it just sounded like Herbie was just experimenting with instruments and it just sounded very off. Like it didn't fit the period or it just didn't fit the film. And some of these pieces just kind of hurt the scenes that they were in because it became more of a distraction than something that added to the scene and made it better. The $30 million budget is definitely on the screen. Like it's not a movie that looks like it's cheap in any capacity. I would say one of the most impressive things about the film is honestly the costume design and the art direction. I think everyone involved on that front did a really good job authentically recreating the look of this late 30s uh, after hours club and just the town of Harlem. And the running time, it's a bit too long, 116 minutes. Like it's almost 2 hours, and it really does drag a few too many points throughout. But it's not that bad of a film. Like it's a movie that is disappointing considering the cast and everyone that's involved, and how it's a period piece instead of just being something that takes place in modern day. But it's still actually worth a watch if you ask me. For the cast, for some of the elements from the script that actually do work, and it was an interesting film. Like it was not as effective or as strong as it could have been overall, but it was still something that at the end of the day I didn't mind watching, and I could see myself maybe watching it again. It's not one of my favorites, but I'd rather watch this any day over a lot of Eddie's other comedies that he did during the low point of his career. Like I'll take this over Meet Dave, Pluto Nash, Norbit, Haunted Mansion, Thousand Words, like any of those kind of films, or Holy Man. Like this isn't one of my favorites of Eddie's career or even Richard's career, but it's also not one of the worst. But that's just me. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Harlem Nights, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.